the County Observer and Monmouthshire Central Advertiser, Abergavenny and Raglan Herald, Usk and Pontypool Messenger and Chepstow Argus introduce us to the life and exploits of the renowned King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table.
Chapter 8. At the fixed time we are assembled here to point the day and fix the solemn pomp, for placing England's crown with all due rights upon our sovereign Arthur's youthful head. Some busy meddling knights there are, as such, will still be prating, who presume to carp and cavil at his royal right. Therefore, I hold it fitting, with the soonest, to appoint the order of the coronation, so to approve our duty to the king, and stay the babbling of such vain gainsayers. Final test for the sovereignty. Merlin calls Arthur, who again draws the sword from the stone and thrusts it back into the anvil. King Clarience disputes Arthur's right to be king. The stone and anvil shivered to atoms, and the sword disappears. The revolt of the barons. Clarience's feigned homage. Merlin cautions Arthur against Clarience. The feast of Pentecost arrived, and a goodly number of lords, knights, and common people assembled in the churchyard of the cathedral to witness the final test for the sovereignty of Britain. There, in front of the door, stood the anvil, and in it, beaming like a meteor in the heavens, was the magic sword. The long train of nobles and knights, one by one, in his order of precedence, stepped up to the stone and essayed to draw out the sword. All failed, though they put forth their utmost energies in consideration of the greatness of the prize they had to win. So great was the excitement and anxiety of the mob to know the result of the ordeal, that the men-at-arms had much ado to keep back the rush that was made to see what was going on. Many even ran upon the points of the soldiers' spears and alberts, and received serious wounds. Then was the popularity of each candidate severely tested, for when some great baron, disliked by the lower orders, failed in his endeavour to draw out the sword, his defeat was hailed with cries of derision, and many a black scowl the thwarted aspirants cast at the common thrall, and many an inward vow they made of wreaking dire vengeance upon the rabble. But when some favourite baron, famed and loved for his valour in the field and his humanity at home, was forced to quit the sword, there was respect and disappointment in the people's sympathizing shouts. Last of all appeared young Arthur, emerging from the dark portals of the cathedral, where he had been praying, and stood forth in the sight of the vast multitude, who, as they beheld the gallant form, the frank, noble face, the steadfast blue eyes, and long golden locks of the royal youth, set up a shout of joyous recognition, as almost to shake the firm foundation of the mighty pile that loomed above him. Upon his head blazed a helmet with a long drooping white plume. His jupon was of dazzling white, void of the coat of arms generally emblazoned upon that garment, but richly and fancifully embroidered. A sumptuous girdle set with gems encircled his waist. Below this, covering his body and limbs, were encased in a suit of complete steel, of Merlin's providing, and therewithal the work of no human hand, that flashed in the sunshine. He bore no weapons, except a little misericord or poniard on his left hip. As Arthur descended the stairs of the cathedral, Merlin raised his wand and cried, "Advance, son of Uther Pendragon, approve thyself right wise king of this fair realm of England." Arthur smiled faintly, but there was more of sorrow than of triumph in his look, as, seizing the handle of the sword, he drew it lightly and fiercely from the anvil. He grasped it with a warrior's clasp. He hurled it high in air and caught it by the hilt, holding it aloft and shaking it till it flashed like a streak of forked lightning. "Hail, Arthur Pendragon!" cried Merlin, and Vivian sinking upon their knees. "All hail, true-born King of England!" The common people took up the cry and rent the welkin with a deep-mouthed shout of "Arthur is son of Uther, long live our king!" Then followed such a tumult as no words can express. Arthur, to give a convincing proof of his right, thrust the sword back into the anvil, and a throng of the infuriated knights rushed upon it and tried to drag it from the stone. But Vivian threw up her snowy arms, and in a moment the sky was overcast with black clouds, and the air was darkened as though the sun had suddenly vanished from the heavens. A loud roar of thunder burst on the ear, and then a red bolt crashed down from the sky and shivered stone and anvil to atoms. The sword was gone. The astounded nobles fell back, while the mob, with clubs and quarterstaves, broke through the line of men-at-arms, shouting wildly, "The sword, the token, the Excalibur!" Then Clarience, king of Northumberland, who thought to have been king, held up his warder and shouted in a stern voice, "Stand back, ye churls! This youth is not your king. The sword has disappeared, snatched by some higher power from the grasp of yon juggling wizard, Merlin, Wilt, who deserves no other grace than a short shrift and a stake and tar barrel." A witch, to the flames with him, roared the nobles. "Where is the Excalibur?" Merlin laughed. Vivian waved her hand. The nobles murmured, and the mob shouted again and again. "It is sorcery," cried King Clarience of Northumberland. "Down with the warlock Merlin!" Whilst the common people, held at bay by the levelled bills and halberts of the guard, clamoured for the king's rescue, the disaffected barons would have charged upon them with drawn swords, had not Merlin, raising his wand, stayed their advance. Each man seemed turned to marble, yet the poorer sort heeded naught of the wonder. They only watched Arthur. Then the king's friends interposed, and the refractory barons were glad enough to yield when they found how strongly the tide was turned against them. For still the populace, fascinated by the regal Arthur, rent the air with shouts of "Mercy, Arthur, our king, our king." Then Clarience walked up to the hero of the hour, and clearing his brow, said courteously, yet with a covert sneer, "My young but noble liege, accept my homage. If I dare speak bluntly, that could I have my will, I would that the great Pendragon of England had been approved by other and higher test than this. But as it is, I yield you my allegiance." Arthur smiled and stretched out his hand, but Merlin, with a dark frown, stepped between them. "Touch him not," he whispered. "Better an open foe than a pretended friend." With this, he drew Arthur away. Most of the hostile nobility, seeing that the people were determined to elect the youth for their sovereign, offered no further resistance to the popular will, but a few retired from the scene, vowing that Merlin was a wizard and deserved to be sent to the stake, and that Arthur was an impostor. The greater number, however, carried the sway, and there was no further disturbance before the coronation.